Okay, good morning. Hello, my name is Mark Lau. Today I will be covering the first part of a multi-part webinar over the new concrete package, as David had just stated there. So we'll have a couple more webinars after this also. In this webinar, we will be covering modeling members, adding components, detailing erection views. So if you guys have any questions, at the end of this webinar is when we'll get to answering the questions there. So if you don't get answered right away, we will answer them at the end here. So let's go ahead and get started here with, I've got the model in here now, and I want to go ahead and add in my concrete. So the first member we're going to add in is going to be the concrete pad footings. So I already have a view set up here for my top of footings. So I'll go ahead and open that here. And then I want to go ahead and enter in my concrete pad footings. So I'll go ahead and hit F2 to bring up my member type selection. And you'll notice now in the concrete package, you'll have quite a bit more members in here to be able to add in your different concrete members that you have here. So the first thing that I want to add in here is my concrete pad footing. So I'll go ahead and select that. And the point that you are picking is going to be the top center of the concrete pad footing here. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my first point up here. And then in my concrete pad footing edit screen here, my first option is going to be elevation. So that's the elevation that I had opened up with the top of footing, 87'1". Next, I've got a width. I'm going to change this to 6'0", and then I've got a length. So I'm going to change this also to 6'0", and then I have my depth. I'm going to change this to 1'10". So my depth, as we notice, we picked the top center of that pad footing. Whatever value I set in here is going to go into the screen when I'm in a plan view here. You also can have the ability to rotate that pad footing around. We have a strength here. I'll change it to 3,500, which it will come from your setup there, which we will cover in the next webinar, the part 2 webinar there. Then we have the option for sequence, and then we have a finish here. So smooth, broom, stamp, stained, epoxy, sealed. We've got different finishes here we'll look at in our setup options also in the second part of the webinar there. Then we have graphical option, model complete date, and then you can see your volume for cubic yards and cubic feet here. So that's going to cover so far the pad footing. So I'll go ahead and hit OK here. You'll notice that it came in here. I'm going to go ahead and repeat around my building where my pad footings need to be there. Okay, so now I've got my pad footings in here. The next member that we are going to add in here is going to be our continuous footings. So I've already set up my construction lines here for the center of my continuous footing. So this is another member type here is the continuous footing in my F2 or member type selection list. And I will go ahead and select my continuous footing here, and I will pick my points for my continuous footing. I can just go ahead and pick all the way around the building here. And then you'll notice that when I go back and create a close that polygon here, or go back to the original point, it will bring up my continuous footing edit window here. So the first option here is going to be my template. So you'll notice that there's nothing in there. If I browse, I'm going to have 2 templates installed in the system by default. And this is going to be in your concrete setup, and under concrete job options, and then in there your continuous footing templates. And you can go in there and modify these, or we can add it in. We will be covering more of that setup when it for the next webinar here. So I'll go ahead and select the first one here. Next, we have a reference option here. So I've got either a center, an interior, or an exterior. This all depends on if I picked my points clockwise or counterclockwise. If I picked my points counterclockwise like I did there, when I have it set to exterior, it will put the exterior of the wall on the points, on the line for the points that I picked there. If I set it to interior, then the interior section of the wall will be on the points that I pick. Now, if I do it counterclockwise, it will be the exact opposite there. If I go counterclockwise and I've got it set to interior, the whole concrete or continuous footing will be on the inside of the points that I picked. If I do exterior, it will be on the outside of the points that I picked there. So I've set my construction lines up here to be in the center, so I'm going to leave it at center. We've got the same options like we covered in the pad footing there. Next, we have our rebar settings. Because we set up that template, it's going to, inside the template, it's going to give us rebar. We'll have control over the setup there for the rebar that's placed in there. So we've got our rebar options here to where we've got a minimum bar length and a maximum bar length. So how long you want it to be before it has to start a new bar there, and then your lap length. So if you have your max bar length set to 30 foot and you got a 40-foot run, you've got another piece in there. How much do you want the lap there or the overhang to be there? Then in corners, how long do you want the corner leg length when it goes around the corner? You can do offset corners, add hooks to continuous bars in 90-degree corners. You can run ties to the outside of the corner and run ties through the extensions there. Okay, next here we have a diagram. So this is going to be according to the points we've picked here. So I went clockwise, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. I can click in here to be able to modify the points that I picked. Maybe I would need to change the dimension about these points that I've picked here. So and also if I click in here, you can see the dimensions here that it's pulling off of. And where that's pulling from is, you'll notice dimension by, we have origin point, previous point, or length and angle here. So if I right click in my field here, I've got an insert row or delete row option. So I can insert more rows or I can delete them. If I left click in the field here, I can pull another point. So if you want to add another point, you can do it that way. Also, I can delete that out. If I want to, I can left click on one of the points and be able to drag it out to different locations. I've also got, when I'm viewing this diagram here, I can change it to be able to see depending on what points that I have picked it in. So I've got X, Y, X, Z, or Y, Z there to be able to pick points from. Then I also have left end settings and right end settings for my continuous footing. With those, I can be able to extend the longitudinal bars here, give it an extension length, and tell it if you want hooks or not. For this one, I'm going to leave, I'm not going to extend anything because I had it go all the way around. I'm going to show you another way that you can put in these continuous footings, and we will extend the longitudinal bars here. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK here and let it go there. You guys can see that it did put the rebar in here for my continuous footing. I'm going to put one more continuous footing in here. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm just going to put it in between my two pad footings just by framing to the edges of it there. So I've got my general settings. I'm going to leave everything default as it was from the first one I put on. The only difference is I'm going to extend the longitudinal bars. I'll go 1'6" here, and I'm going to do no hook because it's going into the pad footing there, so I'll just leave it as no hook. And now you'll notice that when I go ahead and select this continuous footing, that I can have my extend my longitudinal rebar into my pad footing here. So that brings up another point here of when I look at my pad footings, I do not have rebars. So the continuous footing did because I am picking a template from my setup options, which that's where you have it all set up for the rebar and everything that it's using. The pad footing does not have the template. So what I'll do here is I can add a component to be able to add the rebar. So I'll select the pad footing here, and then I will do component add. And with component add, I'm going to use Rebar System to be able to add it to this pad footing here. So I'll select Rebar System, go ahead and click OK. Okay, so in my Rebar System edit screen, I've got my option of my general settings here. I can do number of mats. And with having more than one, you'll notice that I have distance between mat 1 and 2 and distance between 2 and 3. So you can set up the spacing where you can see in this diagram, I've got my 3 different mats here. I can space them out. In this case, I'm just going to use one mat here. And I'm going to have, next I have the chair that I can control the chair dimension there. And then I also have the cover. I'm going to change the cover to 2 1/2 for my cover. And then if I come down in my mat settings, I can have the mat go each way, or if I uncheck this, then I've just got my main bar, or if I check this on, I'll have a main bar and a secondary bar here. So with that, I can see that I can select between the main and secondary bar. So I'll have the main bar selected. And I'll come over here, I can set the size. I'll change this to a number 5 rebar. For number of rebar in space, so how many rebars do I want in that space? I'm going to go ahead and have 7 rebars in that space. I've got my specification, I've got grade, then I've got the coding that I can control. Then I have start extension and end extension, to where if I want to extend those rebar past the continuous footing, I can, and tell it what type of hook type. So next I'm going to go ahead and pick my secondary bar, and you can have your secondary bar be something different. I'm going to leave this as a number 5 and 7 in the space there. So once I've got that filled out, I can go ahead and hit OK here. And now you'll notice that it has added my rebar in here. So one thing I could do too is I could go ahead and select one of the pad footings here, and I can say select all 15, and then I could do my add component rebar system. I'm going to leave everything as it was before here, go ahead and hit OK, and now you'll notice that I have all my rebar in the pad footings here. Okay, so the next member that we're going to get ready to add in here is going to be my wall here. So with that, I will go ahead and go to my F2 here and go to the concrete wall. And you'll notice here that I have round corner options. So if I want to round the corners, I can. I'm going to go ahead. I've got my concrete lines set up here to be able to pick. For this time, I've got it on the inside of my concrete, or inside of my concrete wall is the points that I'm picking right now. Okay, so when I put in my concrete wall here, I will start out with my height here. So I want to make my height at 12'0", and then I'm going to change my thickness here to be 10. And then for my reference point, I pick the points that I want. I want the wall on the I want those points to be the inside portion of that wall. So with going in a clockwise direction, I'm going to put it to interior because I want that interior part to be on the points that I picked there. I have the same strength and sequence and finish here. Then I have my same diagram that I can control here. Okay, we'll go ahead and show it here that you'll see that I have no rebar in that wall because of I did not use a template, or there's not a template there for the wall. So what I can do is select my wall here and do my add component, and I can use my rebar system again to be able to add my rebar here. The difference here is with the wall is I've got an inside mat, a center mat, and an outside mat. So I can have all three of them if I want, or I can just have the outside here if I want. And then each way, and I can do corner rebar. For my horizontal bar, I'm going to leave it 5 with a 1 foot spacing. But for my vertical bars, I want a 9-inch spacing. So to kind of explain this with the wall here, looking at this rebar diagram, you'll notice that when I select this, it's going to call it the vertical bar. So this is actually looking down at the wall from a plan view in this rebar diagram. So these rebar are the vertical ones, and then these would be the horizontal because you're looking at it in looking down on it in a plan view there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK here. Let it give me my rebar. So now that I've got my rebar, we'll go ahead and take a look here. And you can see that I do have my overlap here of for my rebar and my walls, since it was longer than my 30-foot length there. The one thing you'll notice is there is not any dowels holding the rebar from the concrete wall into the pad footings there, or the continuous footing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another component in here to be able to add in my dowels here. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to cut a section view where my first rebar is right there, the center of my first rebar. So I'll go ahead and cut that section view. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and add in some construction lines so I'm on that rebar and to be able to put in this the dowels here for you. So what I'll do is I'll select my pad footing in this case here, and I'll go over to my component add. And instead of doing a rebar system, I have a repeated rebar. So I want to put multiple of these dowels in here. So I'm going to run the repeated rebar system. Click OK. I have the options for select rebar shapes. So you can select a shape that's already been created, or I can create from layout, which I'm going to go ahead and create from a layout here. So once I do that, I've got the option window up here, bend as arc with an arc radius. Then I've got a start hook, a hook type. So I'm going to do an in hook for my start one and do it a 90 degrees so it goes into my pad footing there. And then for the end hook, I will not set one up there. So my first point, may go ahead and pick down here, and then my second point I'll pick up here, and then middle click to complete. My first window is going to come up and show me my diagram of what I put in there. I've got my rebar size that I can change, maybe change it to a 5 since the wall rebar system is using number 5 rebar. Then I've got specification, steel grade, my coating. You have a function type for what it's going to, and then I've got my reference point here, so where you're wanting your reference off of. I'm going to leave the rest default here and go ahead and hit OK. And then next window comes up. This will be about placing those repeated rebars. So my option, direction, do I want to repeat the rebar into the screen or out of the screen? In this case, I want to go into the screen. I cut a section view right on the center of that rebar. Well, if I'm going to put in a rebar in there, I do not want it to be right on the center of it. So I'm going to put in a 1/4 inch offset for that number 5 rebar. And then I have number of rebar I want to put in. So you'd have a count there. I'm going to go ahead and put in 20 in here. And then you can do it by depth, or I'm going to do it by spacing, because when I put in the rebar system in my wall, for the vertical bars, I did a 9-inch spacing. So I'm going to change this to 9 inches. And I'll go ahead and hit OK here. Then if I rotate around, you can see in this case that it threw in my rebar. And if I look here, it is right next to the vertical bars there. Okay, so with going along with the wall here, we also have the option for being able to add in a concrete wall opening here. So I'm going to come in here and I'll just add in some construction lines in here to create our wall opening. Okay, so now I've got a wall opening here 3'6" and 7 foot up. So what I'll do is go ahead and select the concrete wall here and go to my component add, and at the top here I have a concrete wall opening. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and I'm going to pick the 2 points to make up the width across the top of that opening. And in here, I have my opening settings. So I've got my width as 3'6", and then height, I'm going to change this to 7 foot for my height. Now with that opening, it's going to stop the concrete, and you've got your different cover that you can put in there. So I'm going to change this maybe to a number 5 to match up with the wall there. And I'm going to add in that perimeter reinforcement to go around the opening there. So I've got my bar extension. I might put this for 1 foot, and then for my corner bar length, I'm going to go ahead and add 2 foot, and then I've got a cover of 2. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK here. Now you'll notice that it's going to put in the opening. It's going to give you your 2-inch cover for the rebar there. and then I've got my reinforcement around the wall opening. Okay, another option we have is we've got a void layout here. So let me go ahead and add a couple of construction lines in here to be able to add that in. So I will select the concrete wall here, and then in my component add, I have a void space layout here. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. I've got rounding corner options again here. With this, instead of just picking the 2 points, I can come and do a layout. So I can go ahead and complete that. I have a thickness here that I put in depending on going clockwise or counterclockwise for whether the thickness goes in or out there. I'm going to change this to a -10. I had my wall thickness at 10 there. Then I have the diagram of the points that I had picked there, so I'll go ahead and hit OK here. And now you'll notice that it puts my void layout to make an L here, and then it sets cover here around this opening here. So it will, the rebar will pay attention to that void space layout there. So with going in a clockwise direction, my negative number went into the screen. If I went in a counterclockwise direction, positive would go into the screen there. Okay, so the next member type that we're going to add in here is we're going to add in some pilasters for our columns to be able to set on here. So I'm going to open up a view here. I've got top of wall view, and we're going to come in here for some of our columns here to be able to put in our pilasters. So I'll go ahead and hit F2, and I have my pilaster member here to be able to add. I'm going to pick this point right on the wall and on the center of the column there. It's going to come up and ask me for a template. So I'll go ahead and browse. By default, SDS2 installs these 3 options here. You can modify them or add new ones in setup, which we will cover in the next webinar. So I'm going to pick wall 24 here. Next, I have my rotation. So kind of think of it as with a column looking at a plan view with the web, your rotation here. So I need to, if I want that up and down there, I'm going to put at a -90 degree rotation. I can change my strength here. You've got the same fields here, sequence and finish. Then you also have the same rebar settings, except for with the pilaster, you have include vertical bars from template. Checkbox. So with the template that you're using, do you want the vertical bars shown in there? And then I have my bottom end setting and top end setting. The top of my wall there was at 99'1", so I'm going to change my bottom end setting. I want this to be 87'1", which was the top of my footing there. And then I can also, with this, extend my vertical bars into my footing. So I'll go maybe 1'0" here with the 90-degree hook. And I'm going to go ahead and hit OK here. Okay, now if I rotate around, we'll take a look here. You can see that it added my rebar in there. It's gone down a foot and had my hooks on there. And then another thing you'll notice here is that I made sure that I've got my 1-inch grout spacing here. So when I put that in, you can plan for your 1-inch grout spacing. Another thing to show here too also is I'm going to add in anchor rods here for this column. And you can notice that it adds in my anchor rods into my pilaster here with my rebar. So with that, when you're having like a column sit on top here, you might want to have a sturdier connection towards the top there, to where you might want to add, well, you'll want ties in this whole pilaster, but you can now you can control the distance for the ties for each member here. So I'm going to go ahead and select the pilaster and go over to my component add here, and now I have tie zone. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK here. Okay, so in this option here, I've got my start and my end. So this isn't an elevation at all. This is the start for the 0 would be the bottom end of my pilaster here, and then it will go whatever the distance is to the top or top end of the pilaster. So I've got a 12-foot pilaster in here, so I'm going to go from 0, and I'm going to go up to let's say 10 foot. So we'll go 10 foot of this pilaster, and then I have options to exclude the first tie or the last tie here. We won't exclude it here. Maybe when we go to put in our next one, we'll exclude the first tie, since we're not excluding any here. Then I've got my spacing type here. So I'm going to keep with uniform here, and I've got my spacing at 1 foot 0. I'm going to leave that so my ties will be 1 foot 0 spaced apart. And my tie type, since we'll just leave this from the template setup, or you could do a manual and be able to select everything. You go ahead and hit OK. And now you will notice that I have my ties in here, 1 foot spacing, and it goes up 10 foot. So I want to have closer spacing ties up at the top here. So I'm going to go ahead and select that same pilaster, go to my component add tie zone. And this time for my start, I'll go at 10 foot, and then I'm going to end it at my 12 foot. But since I got a tie at 10 foot already, I want to exclude the first tie here. And then at 12 foot, I'll exclude the tie up at top 2. And I want to change this from 1 foot. I want to go closer spacing, so I'm going to change that to 4 inches there. Go ahead and hit OK. Now you can see 4-inch spacing here, and then I've got the 1 foot below that. So I can set up multiple different tie zones in one member here to be able to control the spacing there of the tie zones. Next option we will be adding in here is going to be our concrete slab. So I will go ahead and I'm going to open up my view where I want for my concrete slab here. And then I'm going to add in my concrete slab under my member type. I've got my rounding options. I want to round here. Otherwise, I'm just going to pick on the inside of my wall. And then once I get back to complete a polygon, it will bring up my member edit window here. So I've got a thickness here. I might change this to an 8-inch thick slab. Change the strength again here. And then I have my diagram here. So if I need to modify any of the points again, like we talked about, I've got my X, Y, and Z here that I can control. I can click in and change the values there. If I had a radius, I can go ahead and modify those. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And you'll notice that I've got my concrete slab in here now. I did not have a template for that. And you can notice that there's no rebar in here. So I will select my, I'm going to select my slab here and then do my component add. And I'm going to do a rebar system again here. And this time, since I did a rebar system on the slab, it's actually going to have me pick a reference point, and then it will pick the direction for how I want that rebar ran there. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a second point for that. I've got my number of mats that I can control. In this case, I'm just going to do one mat. I'm going to do my chair at 2 and my cover at 1.5 here. And then I'll leave my rebar at size number 5 with a 1-inch spacing, and make sure my secondary bar, I'll probably change that back to a 1-foot spacing also. Go ahead and hit OK here. And then you'll notice I do have some lap here, and it's got my rebar in here. Okay, so that is adding in the slab there. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to add in beams, steel beams, to show the embed connection to the concrete wall here. So I'm going to open up a view here of the top of wall. I'm going to show you here. So I'm just going to add in a couple of beams here. So I'll do my beam add. And it does not matter here with when you're framing to the concrete wall. I can frame to I can pick the point on the face or pick the point on the center. If I pick a point on the center, it will recognize to be able to set that back. So, okay, so we will cover in the auto standard for setup there where the embeds are pulling from. But to show in today's webinar, I'm going to change to a shear plate for my connection here, and then for my embed plate schedule. So this is where you're going to look at your embed. I'm going to click Browse. So by default, SDS2 by default, when you install SDS2, it will have the 2 embeds already created in there. I came in and created a 3rd embed just to be able to show during this webinar, to where you can go in and modify it. You can go ahead and create your own, and we'll cover that in setup in the next webinar we go over. So the first one here I'm going to cover is I'm going to go ahead and select this EM1 plate location. It's going to be inside the wall, and I've got studs here. I can see number of studs. So I'll go ahead and hit OK here. Go ahead and hit OK. Okay, now we can take a look here. I've got my beam. I've got my embed plate sitting in the concrete wall here. I've got my studs. And if I rotate around here, I can see that I've got my shear plate connection. So this is a system designed connection here. It will put in that embed plate there, connect the shear plate to it, and design the connection there. Okay, I'm going to add in 2 more beams here. So I'll show you that now I can pick to the face of this. And this time I'm going to use embed plate 2. It's going to be on the outside of the wall because it's got holes. Okay, now if I look from a plan view here, you can see that it's outside the wall. If I rotate around, I have holes here for if I've got like epoxy anchors here to where it will be connected up. And then I also have, again, my shear plate connection that's system designed with the embed plate. Okay, and the last one I'm going to add in here is going to show DBAs here. So I'm going to pick my last one here, the EM3. I got DBAs here, and it's going to be inside the wall. Go ahead and hit OK here. And then take a look. So you can see that it's inside the wall. Then you can see that I have my DBAs there. Okay, next member type that we are going to add in here is I will go ahead and add in I'm going to add in a CMU wall here. So if I go to my F2 member type selection, I can go to my CMU wall option here to pick, and then I'm just going to pick my 2 points. At the very top here, I have my sequence. It's going to tell me my total wall length. Then I have my wall properties here. So for my field block, I can browse and choose what type of field block that I want to use. Then for my in blocks, I can also browse and choose for what I want my in blocks to be. I've got my reference, so just like the continuous footing or the wall here, I've got my reference for which side I want it to be, according to picking your points clockwise or counterclockwise. And then you have your starting edge and ending edge. Do you want that flush, weave, or weave perpendicular? Next, I have my wall segments down here. So if I had multiple wall segments, so if I went around and made a box, I would have 4 different wall segments that I could edit each one. I've got my start and end height. I've got my start and end depth, and then I can do my top and bottom style, either stepped or smooth. And then if I've got different wall segments, I'll have my joint types there. I can either weave or butt. Next, I have my diagram here. So then, same thing for my CMU wall. I pick my 2 points here. I can click in here to be able to change or modify. Go ahead and hit OK here. And then what we can do is I can rotate around. You can take a look that I've got my CMU walls in here. Okay, the next member that I will add in here is going to be our concrete column. So I'll go ahead and add in some construction lines in here. Okay, so I will do my member type selection here, and I've got my concrete column. Go ahead and hit OK. Pick my point in a plan view. I have my template here that I can select. 3 are installed by default. You can go ahead and modify them or add new ones here, and we'll cover that in setup. In the next webinar, I'll go ahead and pick this 16 by 16. You've got rotation, strength, sequence and finish like before. You've got the rebar setting here, and then I've got my elevation height here. So I'm going to change this to say 90 foot 0, and this one, the top, I'll set to 100 foot 0. And then I can also extend my vertical bars if I want there. Go ahead and hit OK, and then I'm going to repeat it over here. So then you'll notice from a vertical, I've got my rebar in there. If I rotate around, I've got my concrete columns with my rebar in there. Next, I will add my concrete beam in here for my member type. Okay, I go ahead and add in concrete beam, and I'm going to pick the center of the column or the intersection of construction lines that I picked here. And I will set this to be 100 foot 0 where I put the top of the columns there. Then I have a template also for my concrete beam. 2 are installed by default there. I'm going to pick the first one. And then I have the same settings like I did for the column there. And I'll go ahead and hit OK here. And then you'll notice that it set my beam back. It noticed my column here. and set it back there the 8 inches. If I wanted to, I could also add in the tie zone for, say, the beam there. Okay, so if I want to add in a tie zone here, so it's going to come from the end of my member here. So if I select my beam, I can go ahead and do a tie zone. In this case, I'm going to start 8 inches because that's where the start of that beam with the setback is there. And I'm probably going to go to 2'8" here with a 4-inch spacing. I can go ahead and hit OK here. Oop. And now I'm going to add in another tie zone. We'll go from 2'8" to 18'0". And I want a 1 foot spacing here. So then I'll go ahead and add in my last tie zone here. My 4-inch spacing so that I get my tighter spacing towards the end there. So you can see tighter spacing towards the ends there and gets larger spacing there in the middle. So that covers so far what we have for our members that we've added, that we're going to add in under this webinar here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to detail a couple erection views here, place them on sheets, and show you some tables that you can add there. So I'm going to go ahead and detail my erection views here. The first one I'm going to do is I'm going to do the top of footing. And I'm going to come in here and click on my settings to be able to show some settings here. So the first new thing you'll see here is I've got a concrete member style and a rebar material style that you can control while detailing erection views. For the member style, I can pick my line style per these members in here. So I can be able to select on that. Now, my next option down here is I've got an option to show concrete hatching. So if you want to show it or not, I'm going to uncheck it for this webinar purpose. And then also, I'm going to set a status display because with my top of footing erection view, I do not want to see my concrete slab there. So when I set the status display, I can turn this to mask. And I'm going to mask a member type. So I'll go into member status, member type, and then I can scroll down and I've got concrete slab right here. So I can go ahead and hit OK. And then I'll hit OK to this, and I'm going to detail this top of footing here. Okay, next I'm going to detail my top of slab here. So I'll select it, go into my settings here, and I'm going to make sure my set status display criteria is unchecked because I don't want to hide that slab, and I'm going to turn off the show concrete hatching here. Go ahead and hit OK and OK here. Okay, now I will go into Drawing Editor to take a look at my erection views here. Okay, we can see here that I've got my erection view here of top of footing with my rebar in there, and I do not have the concrete slab. We will talk in the next webinar about tools to be able to use in these erection views here. I'll go to my next drawing here, the top of slab, and you can see that I do show my rebar in here for my slab, and I do have some callouts there for my rebar. we'll talk more about that in the next webinar here. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new erection sheet. I'll call this top of footing. I'm going to use the E24 by 36. Go ahead and place the footing on here. Okay, so with being able to put this on a sheet here, we do have tables now that can have like your bend schedule there. So I'll go up to my objects, pull down, go to my tables and add. And in my table edit window here, under my custom report, I have the drop down here. I've got my different rebar reports here. So I might go foundation rebar schedule. Hit OK. I can place that. I may go to table add again, and this time I may pick the bend schedule. So I'll go ahead and hit OK here. I can go ahead and place my bend schedule. And then with my bend schedule, I'll also get these images here to be able to show where my bends are there and the values calculated. So for the ABC here for my bend schedule, so I've just added that and it automatically fills it out for me according to my erection view I have on this sheet. And I also have my foundation rebar plan here to be able to call out all the information for your rebar on this plan. So then I could do that again to where I could create a new one. Let's say we'll go top of slab, pick E24 by 36, go ahead and place my top of slab drawing, and then I could add my tables in there again. So custom report, foundation rebar schedule. And if I wanted to, go ahead and place it twice, edit it here, and change that to the bend schedule. That concludes the webinar for today for the part one of a multi-part webinar over the concrete package.